The Fork in the Path. Written by Area 51 Express. I gave my wife's foot a squeeze as I wished her a good day. A sleepy cooing emanated from the darkness. That day started out beautifully. The sun hadn't risen yet, and a light fog shrouded the still-lit streetlights. I mounted my bike and I headed off to the brew pub. My small pub was centrally located, employed 12 people, and was finally starting to turn a profit. It's amazing how quickly things turn around. Running parallel to the main street of my city is a park trail. It's a favorite for cyclists to avoid the busy street, and that early in the morning, there's very little foot traffic. I passed by the children's water park, one with those sprinklers shaped like palm trees and animals. Next to that are 3 stone tables inlaid with marble checkerboards. I noticed that the table closest to the path was set up. I thought that since you have to bring your own pieces, someone must have forgotten theirs. I was feeling whimsical, so I dismounted and I examined the board. White had already moved their kingside knight. I mirrored by moving my queen's knight to c6. Contented with my indulgence, I carried on my way to work. I secured my bike and I unlocked the back door of my establishment. Parked off to the side of the parking lot was a police cruiser. I gave whoever was in it a wave. I assumed that it was Officer McCormick, the downtown community officer. He was a friendly guy and the liaison for the Downtown Business Association. It was useful to have a healthy working relationship with him. Some of our patrons could get a little rowdy later on at night. I went inside the pub and went on with my day. That evening, on my way home from yet another successful day, I inspected the game that I had started that morning, only to find it exactly the way that I'd left it. It surprised me that the cheap plastic pieces hadn't blown away in the wind. For the rest of that week, each day I would find that my unseen opponent had made another move. I could play chess with anyone online, but I felt this correspondence game was delightfully old school. It was time to make some trades, so I committed my forlorn hope pawn. Days passed by and I lost 2 pawns, but I captured a pawn and a knight. Students were coming back to town that weekend and business was picking up. Our brewmaster Evelyn arrived to transfer her latest creation into secondary fermentation. If I had the vision, she had the talent. We had good pub fare, but it was the beer that gained us traction. I opened my desk drawer to retrieve some whiteouts so that I could correct the schedule. 2 plastic chess pieces rolled about in my drawer. 2 black pawns. I held them up, perplexed. I could think of no reasonable explanation as to how they had gotten there. But I just continued on with my day. No-shows were becoming uncharacteristically common, and everyone was having to work hard to pick up the slack. I would leave voicemails with my servers and cooks in vain. Days later, White made an aggressive strike against my front line with a rook. I trapped the rook and traded a knight for it. On my way home that evening, I found what I suspect was the same black knight piece jammed into the spokes of my bike. I just left the pieces that I had captured on the side of the board. But when I thought about it, my captured pieces weren't there in the morning. I was relaxing with Miranda, my wife, later that evening. The news reported that a brazen daytime assault had taken place downtown, leaving Officer Michael McCormick with fatal injuries. He had been stabbed in the neck from behind while on patrol and had died on the scene. The police had no suspects. I had been living a pretty sheltered life for the past little while, and Officer McCormick's death came as a blow. So I asked my wife if she wanted to take a trip up to the cottage on Sunday, just to get away. I rarely take days off. There's no time when you have a small business. Taking a day off also meant that it would be the first day that I hadn't played chess with my mysterious partner. Anyway, I went through the park on Monday. I was missing my king's side bishop. White had a pawn out of position, and I assumed that it had taken my bishop. That was absurd. If I missed a day, White would make a foolish move for me? In frustration, I wiped the board clean and I took all the pieces to work, and then I tossed them into the dumpster. Now, I'm not super religious or anything. Miranda and I go to church on Christmas Eve. We leave a large offering and that's about it. Anyway, my mom called me that night to tell me that Father Dave, our family's priest, had passed away. It seems like he tripped and fell down at the altar. The two-step fall onto the velvet carpet proved too much for the old man. I just wanted to fast forward to tomorrow, so I turned in early. I was settling in when I felt a foreign object under my pillow. It was the Black Bishop. I tried to rationalize it. Surely the piece caught in my sleeve when I threw out the rest, but I knew that it was astronomically unlikely. The next day, all of the pieces were back, almost exactly as they had been. The exception was that my dishonorable foe had run one of my rooks recklessly out of cover and subsequently captured it. It was midday when I received a call from Evelyn's spouse. She hadn't shown up for work because she was involved in a hit and run that morning. Evelyn was dead. I closed the pub so that the staff could grieve properly. I grieved by cleaning Evelyn's equipment. It may not have been healthy to pretend like I was helping her, like it was just a regular day, but that's what I did. I just wanted to feel close to her, and she loved the space that she had created. I was cleaning out one of the mash tuns when I glimpsed a flash of black as it fell into the bucket. I fished around in the bucket and I retrieved a black rook. I swore and threw the piece against the wall. The pretense was over. It was too big a coincidence. Someone was stalking me and leaving these chess pieces as macabre trophies of people in my life. I hadn't made a move that day, but I stormed back to the park. If this sicko wanted to play, we would play. It took days, but we were entering the end game. Taking no casualties added to the difficulty of finishing this. Perhaps that's why I made a mistake. White forked my king and queen. I can't risk Miranda. I'm forced to resign. My Glock and I will wait here all night if we have to. White has to make their move eventually. In the Tunnel, written by haveyouseenadreena. Living in a small town, you have to find creative ways to entertain yourself. Some turn to drugs, others towards adrenaline. My friends and I turned to exploration. The neighborhood we grew up in was on the edge of a vast wilderness, so our curious probes were within easy access. It was during one of these tours when we discovered an enigma that would lead to many an hour of pondering. Creating an odd sort of moat around the mountains that usually ate up our time was an old runoff ditch. During the winter, the water would cease to flow, leaving a 5-foot by 10-foot scar in the earth. On one day of boredom, a friend and I decided to see where the channel led, so we laced up our boots and we set off. Fallen leaves crunched with every step. The skeletons that once bore them loomed overhead on either side of the rut, isolating us from the rest of the world. What little sky we could see was grayed out with clouds. The general atmosphere of the place was a little spooky, to be sure, but we were in a jovial mood, not expecting any sort of danger. The occasional rustling from the bramble would turn our heads, but not increase our blood pressure. After a relatively short period of time, we came upon a curve in the ditch. Running along the right-hand side of the curve was one of those metal barriers that you see along highways. At the time, it didn't seem too bizarre, but now that I think about it, I cannot understand why that structure was there. Strewn about the area was what appeared to be the abandoned items of a homeless person. Most of the detritus was clothing, a tent that had been shredded, and random bits of food wrappers. But one piece stood out to us: a sun-bleached backpack. Allowing curiosity to grip our imagination, we decided to search the bag in hopes that it would contain something noteworthy. The bag held but a single item: a waterlogged notebook. I quickly flipped through the pages and then tossed it aside when I realized that most of the writing was illegible. With our search of the abandoned camp complete, we continued along our trail. The twisting foliage seemed to thicken the further along we walked. In some places, the overcast sky was completely blotted out by a ceiling of branches. There was so little light in those sections that the only thing that kept me going was a desire to seem tough to my friend. If he had checked my pulse, he would have realized that I was scared. Things would shortly become even more nerve-wracking, though. Eventually, the brambles cleared out, revealing the gray sky. However, the muddy walls of the ditch rose to their greatest heights yet, with such a steep embankment that they would have been impossible to climb. Before us, the dirt was replaced with cement as the channel continued beneath the highway. The tunnel was dark, but a light could be seen maybe 30 feet back. "You want to check it out?" my friend asked. No, I very distinctly did not want to climb into the dark, foreboding tunnel. But somehow the desire to not seem like a wimp was stronger. "Sure," I told him. So we crouched down and began approaching the light. Every footfall echoed to a heart-pounding degree in the otherwise silent passage. I can only imagine that the sound of a car passing overhead would have been deafening. Then came a noise that made my tongue catch in my throat and tears well up in my eyes. A low growl. Both of us were frozen in place and staring directly forward when a shadowy movement came from the other side of the light. As the form took shape, we found ourselves unable to move. Then it stepped into the illumination. It was covered from head to razor claw in dark silver fur. Peering down its snarling yellow-toothed snout were glowing orbs, and its angular ears were pointed back in a sing of aggression. "Run!" My friend's scream snapped me out of my trance, and we took off as fast as we could while doubled over. Upon exiting the tunnel, we broke into full-on sprints. It was by some miracle that the creature's predator instincts did not kick in, for it should have caught us before we could make an escape. I looked back once as we rounded the corner where the highway barrier was located, and what I saw is an image that has been burned into my brain ever since. An image that will forever baffle me. But I kid you not, that canine was running solely on its hind legs. Against all odds, it did not catch us, and we ran all the way home. Channel 176, written by DeathsVenom. It was late at night, and I couldn't sleep, so I decided to browse the TV channels to see if there were any good movies on. As I was browsing, I came across Channel 176, which had an action movie on it, so I decided to stay and watch. The movie was about a galactic bounty hunter that had received different tasks. I was almost falling asleep when I heard a whisper coming from the TV. "Psst, psst, hey you." As I heard it, I looked towards the TV and I said, Me? And the TV replied,
Yes, you.
After I realized what was going on, I muttered to myself, am I dreaming or am I going nuts? The TV spoke again, this time louder.
No, you're not insane.
I couldn't believe it. The TV was actually speaking to me. Now I was just staring at it, confused as it continued, this time in a more demonic voice.
You have been chosen to participate in a contest.
For some reason, this got my curiosity up and I asked, okay, what's the prize? The TV responds in the same voice.
Your life.
When I heard this, I muttered to myself again, nope, forget this, and I reached for the remote, but the TV stopped me and said,
I wouldn't do that if I were you.
So I stopped in the middle of reaching for the remote, and I turned to it, asking in an aggressive tone, more out of fear because it can see my movements and what I am thinking. What are you going to do about it, though? The TV laughed for a bit and then said,
Look out your window.
So I did, and what I saw is burnt into my mind for forever. Outside my house was my son who had blood stains on him. His face had deep marks and tears coming from his eyes as he tried to scream, Dad, please help me. But he had his mouth taped shut, and he was tied to an old, rusty metal chair. I was frozen with fear, staring at my son struggling to get out. As my eyes locked on my son, the TV said in that same demonic voice,
Do I have your attention now?
I yelled at it with my shaking voice, What do you want from me? And he replied without skipping a beat,
I want you to listen to my voice.
I simply nodded, unable to say anything more as I was stuck on the couch in a bubble of fear with tears coming to my eyes.
The contest starts 6 days from now. There are 4 more participants in it. All you have to do is be the last one standing. How you choose to survive can determine your fate. If you try to alert the cops or run, your son is going to die slowly and painfully. The only other rule is that if you team up with one of the others, it will result in the death of both of you. The winner will get a call announcing that he won and that he's free to go. Is that understood?
After hearing this, I stood on the couch, now crying, unable to answer or do anything. The TV saw this and yelled in the most high-pitched and inhuman voice I've ever heard.
Understood?
So I yelled back at it. Yes, I understand. After this, the TV said one more thing.
Good.
And then it returned to the movie as if nothing had happened. Seeing this, I thought that I had dreamed it all because I looked out the window, still in fear, and my son wasn't there, so I let out a sigh of relief. There was just darkness and nothing else, so I shrugged it off as being a nightmare, until the next day came, and I received a letter saying only 3 words. It read,
5 days left.
I completely froze in my tracks as I muttered to myself, No, this can't be, it's not happening. I found myself crying again, staring at the paper written in blood with those cursed words. I finally came to my senses and I said loudly, If this is what it takes to keep my son and me alive, then so be it. And I got in my car and I drove in utter silence to a gun shop. This place had everything, so I bought a lot of guns and ammo, and a bulletproof vest with some attachments, a map, compass, and some camo stuff. And I spent the rest of the day training my shooting skills. The day before the contest would start, I received one final letter.
The contest starts tomorrow at 7 in the morning. The police departments, including the FBI, know about this, so you won't be getting arrested. The descriptions of the other participants are on the back of this letter, and every participant received it. You can hide or kill. Your goal is to survive. Good luck.
After reading this letter, I prayed and hoped that I could get an answer, but nothing came. It's currently 2 a.m., and I'm getting everything ready. I'm a strong dude, and seeing how the letter described the others, I have a little more chances of winning than they do. I may not win, but I'm not going to give them an easy time. Plus, this is for my son, because nobody messes with my son and gets away with it. I think that I've got demons in my neighborhood. Written by Pinio69. I believe that I have the creepiest neighborhood. Let me explain with a few stories. There are 2 abandoned houses in my neighborhood. 10 years ago, I was a naive kid who frantically listened to his brothers and friends. We had a tree house in proximity of the first house. That wasn't too much of a problem because at the time we didn't know about that house. For building the house, we had tools but not lumber, so we stole it. Some guy had stashed it in front of his house, which was a very stupid move. To get the lumber, we had to jog by the first abandoned house. At first glance, it really just resembled a pile of old dirty bricks. But a little later, it piqued our interest, so we went in. The house was being renovated, but very slowly. Every time that I was there, I had a very eerie feeling. The house had no doors, so basically anyone could go inside. At least when the workers weren't there, and that was very often. The first floor was pretty much empty, with a barred door to the garage. The second floor had an old thin table with 1 chair. We didn't go to the basement. We didn't have any phones then or flashlights. The creepy thing about this place was the silence. There were no mysterious footsteps, no laughter. There was no sound at all. And also, we never unraveled the mystery of the basement or of the garage. There was just a rumor that the basement was full of dead children, but it was never confirmed. As I said in the beginning, the place was being slowly renovated. We probably slowed it down by 3 or more years by stealing all of their tools, including nails, hammers, saws, even the schematics of the house. After that, they blocked it off completely. Now, the second house was a little further down than the first one. It was pretty much finished, but the exterior wasn't painted. Rumor says that it belonged to a mailman. I went there one day with my friend because we had heard from another friend that it was haunted. This was a few years after we had built the treehouse and everything. We walked by that house every night, and it actually did seem suspicious. So eventually, we went in to check it out, which was the worst decision ever. As we opened the front door, a gust of stale air slapped us in the face. No one had been in that house for quite some time. Everything was trashed. We went into the living room and we sat down. As we talked, the light bulb flickered. It was a bit scary, but it was explainable. We then decided to go to the basement because other rooms were either barred off or were empty. There was a light switch in the basement, so we weren't too scared to go down because, for some reason, the house still had power. We found a crib trashed down in the corner, a broken table in the middle, and a giant 666 written on the wall directly across from all of this. This was also explainable. Some kids or teenagers got in here and trashed the place and have written the numbers on the walls. But nothing can explain what I'm going to tell you next. As we climbed the stairs, all of the light bulbs in the house flickered. That really scared us. We had a feeling that whatever lived there wanted us to stay. As we ran into the hall, we cursed whatever it was. We felt this strange surge of air behind us. Finally, we ran through the door, and they closed by themselves. At first, there was silence. That same mysterious silence. And then we heard crashing, rustling, and clawing from the inside of the house. We stayed outside for a few minutes. There was the occasional scream, probably to lure someone into the house, that someone being us. After that night, we changed the route of our walks.